On today's show, the mailbag is open. We'll be answering your questions as well as looking ahead to a 2-game mini-series for the Hawks up in Brooklyn that begins on Thursday. We'll get into all of that and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1663 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening here in late February. And today's show is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, if you are a new customer, get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bets at FanDuel. The place to go is FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Also want to encourage you, as I always do at the top of the podcast, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts and subscribe on Apple and Spotify, as well as Overcast, Amazon Music, Pocket Casts, CastBox. We're also on YouTube on the video side, and plenty to get to on today's podcast. Also, just a reminder that we've been very busy on this show in recent days. 4 episodes in the last 4.5, 5 days, including a show on Tuesday night, breaking down what became a very nice win for the Hawks against the Jazz on Tuesday at home. So, plenty to get to in general in the Hawks right now. It's a busy time. There's lots of takes flying around and all that stuff. The Hawks do play again, in fact, 3 times in the next 6 days up in the city of New York, 2 against Brooklyn, and then 1 against New York. We'll sort of spend the end of this podcast talking about the Nets game, at least the first one, on Thursday, and then they actually play the Nets again on Saturday afternoon. But prior to that, I got mailbag questions to answer. It's been a little while since I've actually done that, and it was a good time to kind of dive in a little bit here on a Wednesday evening in between games. So we'll dive right in now, in fact, to your mailbag questions. By the way, if you want to send mailbag questions in, I won't get to all of them on the show ever, because there's too many, and that's a good thing, of course. And I'll try to answer you in some form or fashion, either on Twitter at LockedOnHawks or at BT Rowland is my personal account. Also, you can send questions to LockedOnHawks@gmail.com. That's the email address for the show. And then also, if you follow my work at Patreon.com/BT Rowland, I will take questions there as well. And plenty of ways to get your questions answered on the show, and I appreciate the questions always. So, all that said, we'll dive in now to the first one. It comes from Lyndon, who says, I remember you talking a lot about Quin Snyder changing where the Hawks would take shots from on the court compared to what Nate and his staff did before. Has this actually happened? And if so, how has that changed the team on offense? Good question here. This could be its own show, honestly. If I wanted to get super nerdy and wonky, I could dive in for 30 minutes on this. I'm not going to do that now. The short answer is definitely yes. It definitely has happened, and it's very plain in the numbers, actually. Also, the eye test, if you watch the games and kind of focus on that. So last year, even with Quin coming in during the season, so he was only with Atlanta for like a third of the year last year, the Hawks took the second highest rate of mid-range attempts in the entire NBA last year. They took 37.5% of their shots from the mid-range when it comes to cleaning the glass numbers last year. That is a ton of mid-range shots. They were in the top 5 in floater range shots, and also they were 4th, I believe, in long twos. So they took a ton of shots from that area. And a lot of modern offenses don't want you to take those shots necessarily unless, look, there are some guys who are good enough to do it. Trae Young can take mid-range jump shots. DeJounte Murray can take mid-range jump shots. There are guys who are, honestly, in the NBA, defenses are really good, and they're not going to be able to just do whatever you want to all the time. So it's not like they're going to ever take 0 of these, but it's an emphasis kind of thing. So this year, they've gone the complete other direction. In the first year under Snyder, similar roster, so it wasn't like it was a huge personnel change. They're 25th now in mid-range frequency, all the way down to 29% of their shots. So 37.5% down to 29.1%. So again, they're not down to 0, but most of the league is between 25 and 40%, and the Hawks have changed a lot within that range. They're 24th, in particular, long twos, as far as the percentage of their shots that they attempt from that range. So they're taking about half of the long twos that they were before. That's an insane drop for a team, again, that has similar personnel to what it had last year and a coach that was already here for part of last season. So Cleveland Glass has this very useful stat called location effective field goal percentage. And it basically tells you that, always simulates that if every team shot an average percentage from every spot on the court, how effective would their overall shot profile happen to be? So it's not perfect by any means. Different teams have different personnel, and the NBA is personnel-based. I'll be the first one to tell you that. Even as someone who is certainly into the numbers, it's not all the same. You can't just go by as gospel. But it's sort of a raw distillation of where you want to take shots from and how effective your actual shot profile and your approach is on some level. But anyway, the Hawks are 5th in the NBA in that stat. So they have, in theory, the 5th best shot profile in the NBA this year. Again, not gospel, but last year they were 27th in the same stat. The year before that was the last full season under Nate. They were 22nd. So, in short, Quin and his staff have definitely changed the shot profile for the better. It's not just taking more threes. That's always the focus. I've done the same thing. And Quin's talked about this pretty openly. They wanted to take more threes when he got here. They didn't take enough. I ranted and raved about that for probably 2 years, that the Hawks were not taking enough threes. And by the way, that was objectively true. But it's also about more shots at the rim, which kind of leads you to less mid-rangers. So it's not necessarily only about less mid-rangers, but you want to take its paint and it's also threes. And Quin always makes, I think he knows his reputation a little bit, and he'll kind of always repeat the fact that it's not just threes, it's also rim shots, and that's actually right. And overall, by the way, the Hawks are scoring about 2 points per 100 possessions more this year than they did last year. Now, as a team, they've had less success so far this year on the wins and losses scale, but the offense is not the reason for that. It's the defense. So it's solid enough, obviously, that they've been 2 points per 100 better. That's a pretty notable jump with the same, again, pretty similar personnel. And honestly, it should be a little bit more than that if you go by the shooting metrics. I won't go down this rabbit hole too much, but the Hawks have not just shot that well this year. That's a huge factor. They're only 19th this season in three-point accuracy. And if I kind of lined up their talent level, they should be a little bit higher than that, I think, based on the shooters that they have and the attempts they're actually taking. For instance, the only 2 guys that are regulars that are shooting more than 37.3% from 3 this year, as of today on this Wednesday, are Garrison Matthews, who's obviously plays regularly, but is not a huge volume guy because he doesn't play that much, and then DeAndre Hunter, who's missed about a third of the season so far. Bogey is at 37.3%. So that's below his normal number. It's obviously fine for him. He's a really good shooter, but that's not anything great by his standards. Actually below what you would think. Trae Young is right about his norm, 36, 37% this year. Murray, same thing, 35, 36%. That's about what he actually, what I would say probably is the real number for him. But for instance, Saddiq Bey is at 32% this year, and he's taking a lot of them, and that hurts the whole team. Again, it's not just on Saddiq, but essentially, I would say no one other than maybe Garrison Matthews and DeAndre Hunter is shooting higher than they probably would expect to shoot on, and those are not huge sample sizes, where there are multiple guys who are under their normal baseline. I mean, also, there's this like conglomerate of guys on the supporting side, like AJ Griffin's numbers from earlier in the season, even Seth Lundy, who was up briefly in Atlanta, Wes Matthews, like the small bit guys didn't shoot that well either. So all in all, the offense is better this year by the numbers, by the eye test, etc. And the shot profile is very, very clearly better, to answer the question very specifically. So I think if anything, they might have, again, underachieved a little bit based on their shots this year and where they actually come from. But it's notable growth, to answer the question, and the least of the Hawks' worries right now moving forward is their shot profile. A little bit of color on this, by the way. It wasn't necessarily about the offense, but Quin got a question from actually David Locke, who's the founder of this podcast network, on Tuesday. I'm not going to play it for you here. It's about the audio's not great necessarily, but he talked about kind of his philosophy changing a little bit from Utah to what it is now. I shared that audio on Patreon, so I'll plug that one more time, patreon.com/BTRowland, but kind of introspective, and Quin's he's not the most open guy necessarily on like specific answers, but he's always thinking about this stuff. I think he's a very thoughtful constructor of offense, and that's been pretty clear. Again, change in staff, change in player, but just emphasizing certain things. And it's the rare time, well, I didn't love this and said this much at the time, it's the rare kind of example where you had a team that was, they did lose Collins. Like, it wasn't exactly the same team, but you had the opportunity to kind of compare approaches from season to season with essentially the same personnel, and the offense has improved, and so is the shot profile from what you would sort of think as far as the modern NBA is concerned. All right, that's a long answer. My apologies. I could have gone twice or 3 times that length on that particular one, but I wanted to get into that one quite a bit. I will have 2 or 3 more coming up in a second, as well as my thoughts on Hawks Nets, which begins that sort of mini series on Thursday. But first, a word from our partners on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Stitch Fix, and with Stitch Fix, you get a stylist who understands your style, your size, and your budget, and they do all the shopping for you. That makes it easy, and really the easiest possible way to update your wardrobe this year. And with Stitch Fix, I give my stylist my size and my budget preferences and also the style I'm looking for. And then all I have to do is order boxes when I want to and how I want to with no subscription required. They send me just for me pieces plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice. I keep what works for me, send back the rest. And my stylist always sends the just right pieces and the fit is always on point with Stitch Fix. And they make it also easy for you at Stitch Fix as well. I don't like to shop very much, to be honest with you, but they save me that time and that effort in all really in one place. And plus I get the outfits that make me look good and feel good at the same time. And if you don't love something, you can send it back. Shipping, returns, and exchanges are always free at Stitch Fix, and they give you a style that makes you feel as good as you could possibly look. And you want to get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That is stitchfix.com/lockedon. One more time, stitchfix.com/lockedon. Today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes we get the opportunity to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things can give you actually stuff to really get to you, honestly, at the end of the day. It's important to let that stuff out, especially to someone who is unbiased when looking at your life. And sometimes that is the case for myself as well. So today, I want to tell you about something that I really feel is something that sort of eats at you. And also maybe for a few of you anyway, could be similar in that space. They might understand what I'm saying. And that's that I have some unease about the next steps in the media environment right now. I know people that listen to the podcast, some people are actually in the media like I am. And I'm not talking about what's reported by the Hawks in this time, but actually whether there's going to be jobs available, whether the work that I do is going to be available to me and just have it continue the way that it is now. And of course, not the most intense thing in the world or life-altering topics, but therapy can be different for everybody. And most of us, including me, have much bigger problems than this particular aspect. But it is quite important to get things off of our chest sometimes, and really, at least every once in a while. And if you're thinking about starting therapy right now, the place to do that is giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. And there's an easy URL to go to, and that is betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. When you get there, it's 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. That's betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. One more time, the place to go is BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, a shorter question here from Dan who says, I think a lot of us started thinking more about the draft when the Hawks lost 3 straight games and had the injuries to Okongwu and to Trey. I heard you mention the Kings and what happens there. Can you give us a refresher about what we should be tracking with Sacramento? So I apologize for some of this being repeated from previous episodes, but the Hawks get the Kings' first round pick this year, but only if the Kings make the 8-team playoffs in the Western Conference. So if they make the play-in and they lose in the play-in, that pick will not convey. It will roll over to 2025. So it doesn't just extinguish, but if you want the Hawks to have 2 picks this year, and I won't tell you how to root for that, that's up to you, but that's kind of the stakes right now. Top eight, Hawks get the pick. If not, there you go. As I speak, on Wednesday, the Hawks are the 7 seed in the West, and they have a road game tonight later, as I'm recording this podcast, in Denver. So they'll be underdogs in that game. They could win it, of course, but they'll be underdogs. And before that game, ESPN's BPI gives the Kings a 59% chance to make the 8-team playoffs. So narrowly better than a coin flip, despite the fact that they are the 7 seed right now. And some projections a little bit higher than that on Sacramento, but they have a pretty difficult schedule. 8th most difficult by winning percentage remaining in the NBA as of today. And they could get out of the play-in entirely, which obviously would get the Hawks that pick this year. But in the play-in, they could face the Warriors or the Lakers. And those teams, I think, are generally projected, at least as threatening to a team like the Kings in a short, mini series, 1-game situation like that with Steph and LeBron and AD, etc. So my point generally has been that people are kind of probably a little bit too much assuming that the Kings are going to send that pick this year because they either A, don't understand the process, or B, are just assuming the Kings are going to be in the playoffs because they're playing well, and they are. They're 33-24 right now, and I get that. But if they're in the play-in, there is a risk that they could fall out, and the teams behind them are kind of threatening. So at this moment, it would be the 20th pick in the draft, and it would come. So if that happens, the Hawks would have 2 of the top 20 picks in the draft. Interesting. This draft is not great, as we'll talk about much, much more between now and June. But I believe that it is less likely that the pick will come than people are realizing because of the play-in and how bunched up the West is and how it's very competitive. So we'll see, but that's sort of a TBD right now. And again, there are different schools of thought about this. There is one that there's a little bit more upside potentially next year, but for me, if it's going to be in the top 20 picks, which it probably would be, I would personally be on the side of, if I was the Hawks, rooting for it to just come now. Ideally, for me, this year, it would be the Kings getting the 7 seed or the 8 seed in the West. That's what I'd be rooting for, but to each their own on that one. Question from Kelly, who says, is this the new DeAndre Hunter, in quotation marks, I should say, or is it a hot streak, or is it something in the middle? So it should surprise no one that my answer is going to be something in the middle. of course. But there's a lot to like right now about Hunter. I talked about this a little bit at the end of the show last night. Of course, there are the knee issues, and he's played only 34 games this year. But when he has been available, this has been Hunter's best season so far on a per game basis at age 26. Career highs in scoring, 3-point shooting, true shooting percentage, much more efficient shot profile. Going back to what we talked about with Quinn earlier, Hunter's a good example of that. Less mid-rangers, more at the rim, more free throws, more threes, and obviously he's still a quality defender. He's not ever been the game-changing, game-wrecking baby Kawhi is always something I rolled my eyes about. Guy that people might have thought he might be coming out of the draft. I was a little bit, actually kind of liked the draft, but that was always unrealistic. But he's still a good defender. He's actually improved a lot on the margins. Anyway, to the point about the hot streak, he's averaging about 20 points a game or so in the last 5, while only playing 27 minutes a game. He is shooting unsustainably well right now, 46% from 3 in that sample size and 94% at the line during that run, but he is playing very, very well on the whole. So for this year, he isn't getting to the free throw line a ton. Only about 6 attempts per 100 possessions. That's pretty low, but that's also way up from previous years. So that's one positive data point. And by the way, he's an awesome free throw shooter when he gets there, which definitely helps. So more attempts means more efficiency. Mid-range attempts are down. He still shoots a decent amount of them, 34% of his shots, but 44% from them last year, 39% the year before. Only 13% of his shots this year from long mid-range compared to about 20% last year. So still a pretty low attempt rate at the rim for a player of his size at 6'8", but it's up from last year. Plus the free throw rate, which I referenced before, is up as well. So he's attacking the rim more. He's taking more threes and less of those, not unmakeable shots. Like he's actually a guy who could make a mid-range jumper, but not super high percentage shots. Also 44% of his shots this year from 3. That is the most since he was a rookie in the league, and way up from the last 2 years. So he still isn't like an absolute sniper. He's not like actually just launching from 3. I think he should be taking more even. He's taking about 6 attempts per 36 minutes this year. That's a pretty decent number, but if he's going to shoot like this, you want to take even more than that. At least I would be, but that's encouraging. His development there is really encouraging, even if I think he should be taking more. Based on his history, I would tell you that his current three-point shooting is 41.8%. That probably is a little bit higher than it should, quote unquote, should be. That's probably going to regress. Now, maybe it's not. There's always a chance of a new skill development where that's real. And that's not anything negative about Hunter, but in the previous 4 years, he shot 36%. So I am just in general going to default to the previous workload a little bit more. Like, on the other hand, Saddiq Bey, I firmly believe, is a better shooter than he's been so far this year based on the history of Saddiq Bey. Hunter is probably a little bit the other way. Now, I kind of would buy at him as like a high 30s guy. That's believable to me. 42%, maybe a little bit higher than it probably should be at this point in time. But to the hot streak point again, I think there's a little bit of that with three-point shooting right now. That's fueling some of the gains, but not all of them. The fundamental metrics on Hunter are way better, and that stuff matters a lot. Not a huge sample size, and it's also hard to gauge from the outside, but I'll just mention one more time the health concerns. It'd be different if it was fluke stuff, but because he has persistent knee issues throughout his career, it's a little bit more worrisome than if it was just like a little bit of a thing here and a thing there. It's one body part, same thing over and over again. That's a little bit more concerning. So I'm not a doctor, but that's just the history of the league. Knees are troublesome for basketball players. It is what it is. Also on the roll side, Hunter played about 31 minutes a game in the first 24 games before he actually got injured. When he came back, he's not played any game more than 28 minutes so far. And I think the Hawks, this is anecdotal, they have not told me this, but if you watch the way they're using him, it seems pretty clear to me that they're actively managing his minutes. And they're bringing him off the bench, number one. That's sort of a good inherent way to limit minutes. But also, they're taking him out at the 28-minute mark every game right now. I don't know. Maybe it's a coincidence. I think it's probably not. We'll see. The last 4 or 5 games, though, I think that he would have played more than he has played if he was unencumbered by minutes. So we'll see how that is. Maybe they just think that long-term they need to manage his minutes. And the knee is a question mark. So we'll see. It's a TBD situation. They've not told me anything about that. But I think managing minutes for guys for long-term injury stuff is probably a wise process. We'll see. But overall, again, he's having his best year so far, in my opinion. I don't want to talk about defense too much, but he is quite solid there. Again, there's been a little bit more playmaking flashes recently. He's never going to be a huge steals and blocks guy. He wasn't even that in college, but he's really improved as a team defender since he came in the league. That's something I've talked about a lot with Glenn Willis on this podcast. Shouts to Glenn of ATL 29. but he was on this early and I think was right about this. Hunter was billed, and correctly so, coming out of college as like an on-ball guy. And he's been good against big wings. Like he is still their best option against big wings. Like if you ask me who's going to guard Luka or guard Kawhi tonight for the Hawks and Hunter's healthy, he's the guy that I would choose. But he's still better. He's not as good as the on-ball stuff as they thought he might be, especially against smaller guards. I think maybe some of that's the knee stuff too. He's not quite the athlete I don't think that he was 3-4 years ago, but he has improved a lot on the margins. Being a help guy, sinking in, communicating. He's not always the loudest guy in the world, but he's in the right place at the right time most of the time and executes well. So to answer the question, after all that, I don't know if I would call it a new DeAndre Hunter. I'm loath to do that at this point after 34 games of a sample size in year 5. I'm going to trust the sample size, but he is playing well. And at the end of the day, he's a 6'8 forward who can shoot and defend his position. And every team is looking for those guys. So knock on wood, you hope he stays healthy. If he had been healthy this year, I wonder if he had been, I mean, he's obviously been on the trade market before. It would have been a little bit probably louder talk if he had been healthy, but because he wasn't, there really wasn't any buzz about that. We'll see. But hopefully this recent stretch has been a positive one unequivocally. But if he can stay healthy and just play at this level, yeah, the contract isn't like the biggest hit in the world. Like it's not the worst contract in the world either. So it's kind of just I didn't love the extension when it happened. They kind of didn't need to do that. I think if you gave them true serum, I'm not sure they would do that again a year early in particular. But I do think that Hunter is a guy who can earn that deal. He probably won't blow it out of the water, but he can be a starting level small forward with the way he's playing right now. It's just the question about the knees, and hopefully the shooting gains and the shot profile stuff holds up, because if he's attacking the rim more, as he has been recently, and shooting more threes, he's a better, different player, and that is certainly helpful for the Hawks up and down their roster. All right, one more break here from our sponsor of today's podcast. We'll have more coming up, including a preview of sorts of the 2-game Hawks-Nets series that begins on Thursday. But first, a word from our partners on the show. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors, and passion, drive, and patience are what bring home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you're looking for to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. They have superchargers and roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, the list goes on and on and on and on. And whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered in all of that. They have over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, and you'll always find exactly what you're looking for at eBay Motors. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride each and every time, or your money is coming back to you. And because with the eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, and you're not burning cash at all. That's obviously very, very valuable, because I don't like to burn cash. I don't know about you. I don't like to burn cash. So with all the parts that you need, the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win that you are seeking. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. One more time, the place to go is ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, so the Hawks are currently, as we speak, actually up in the New York City area. They play the Nets twice in the next 3 days. They play the Nets on Thursday night at Barclays Center, and they also play the Nets on Saturday afternoon, a 3 o'clock start. And that's part of this, as I mentioned a little bit last night. It's pretty bizarre that the Hawks are essentially in New York City for 6 days, and they play 3 games, no travel. It's a pretty friendly homestand. The league has tried to do at least a couple of these kind of home and home series events. They had one in Toronto this year. They played the Raptors in twice in 3 days. They did one in Washington, I think it was last year. There's 1 or 2 of these per year, and this one is kind of their main one is in Brooklyn. And then that also is followed up with the trip to New York, just across the city a few days from now on Tuesday. So as I record this on Wednesday, the Nets and Raptors are tied for the 11 seed, and they are 4 games behind the Hawks. Toronto plays tonight, so that will change by the time you listen to this podcast, probably on Thursday. But it gives you an idea of where things stand right now in the East after a couple of wins for the Hawks, of course, on Sunday and Tuesday. I mentioned this at the very end of last night's show, but there's a chance that these are kind of 2 of the bigger games this year if you are viewing things through the prism of the postseason race and the play-in race and the Hawks making the play-in. I definitely get if you don't think of it that way, because I'm not necessarily saying you should, but let's just say the Hawks win these 2 games against Brooklyn. If that were to happen, they'd be up by 6 games on Brooklyn with 22 games to go, and they'd have the tiebreaker. So they'd essentially be up 6.5, 7 games, and that's not completely insurmountable, but it would make life incredibly difficult for the Nets. So I would be shifting focus to the Raptors if I was the Hawks, if they win these 2 games. Again, that's a big if. I'm not saying that's going to happen. And honestly, maybe that's the case anyway. Toronto has been better than Brooklyn so far. I asked around to some people that I trust that cover the Eastern Conference in the last day or two, and pretty much everyone believes Toronto is a bigger threat than Brooklyn at this moment in time because Toronto's just playing better basketball and they have a little bit more, I would say a little bit more high end talent. We'll see. But anyway, but we'll focus on Brooklyn, obviously, because the Hawks play them twice in the next 3 days. So for some context, let's go backwards a little bit. The Nets at one point this year, basically the day after Christmas, were 15-15, which isn't like super impressive, but it's a 500 team. That's right in the middle of the play-in race, of course. Since then, they are 7-21. Yikes. That isn't really fluky either. They have a negative 6.9 net rating. That's really bad. It's not quite like Pistons Wizards bad in that sample size, but it's kind of the next step up from that. So bottom 5 offense in that sample size, middling defense. They also fired their coach in Jacques Vaughn recently, hired a new coach in Kevin Ollie, who is familiar, former UConn coach, former NBA player, etc. For the season, they're below average on both ends of the floor. They're 22nd in offense and 19th in defense. 22nd in net rating, a little about a point and a half worse than the Hawks in point differential this year. So not awful, but for as uninspiring as the Hawks have been at times, the Hawks have a net rating 4 points better than Brooklyn in the last 2 months. So there you go. The Hawks have been the better team for a while. Obviously, that gets into some time with that, with Trey and Onyeka playing, but all that said, Brooklyn has a super weird roster. That's part of what makes them kind of strange to talk about. They made some changes at the deadline. They sent out Royce O'Neal and Spencer Dinwiddie. They brought in old pal Dennis Schroeder as their primary point guard right now. They don't have a number one option, in my opinion. Mikal Bridges is really good, and he's obviously their best player, but he's not a number one. He probably isn't even number 2 on offense. Maybe he is if the number one guy is awesome. But yeah, he's not a best player on a good team, offensive player. And after that, you could definitely see why the offense is not very good, given the available talent that the Nets have up and down their roster, beyond, at least I would say after Bridges. They're bottom 5 in the league this year in field goal percentage, at 2-point percentage, and free throw attempts. So anything inside the arc has not been great for Brooklyn all year long. They're league average or so on threes, so that's at least something to keep an eye on. And not a lot of rim pressure at all. They do not turn the ball over very much, which is the opposite of Utah, who turns the ball over at a crazy high level, as we saw in the game on Tuesday. But that's kind of their only small bright spot on offense this year for the Nets. And again, recently, a bottom 5 unit for about 2 full months now on offense. On defense, their best traits are actually the opposite. So they actually stop opponents near the rim most of the time. Nick Claxton is a good rim protector, not an elite one, but a good one. And the Nets are in the top 10 in 2-point shooting allowed and percentage allowed at the rim and floater range. So like they're pretty good around the rim defensively. They do foul a lot, and they don't create a lot of turnovers. So plus their 2-point defense has actually gotten worse during the sample size. Not a huge surprise there. So this is kind of what the Nets are. I should also point out that Brooklyn is only 13-17 at home this year. That's been a running joke around the league this year. The Nets basically don't have a ton of investment locally. I know this is a Hawks podcast, so there's always been these jokes nationally about the Hawks and people kind of the arena being invaded. Barclays is seemingly that or worse right now. We'll see how many Hawks fans make the trip to Brooklyn on either Thursday or Saturday. But I'm only talking about that now because the Hawks are not like walking into some crazy arena here on Thursday and Saturday. So this is a winnable environment. And again, a team. I'm not telling you the Nets are as bad as the Pistons or the Wizards or the Spurs or whatever. But the Nets have not been playing well for a while. Injury-wise, at least in the first game, we have the injury reports available now for Thursday's game. On the Hawks side, it's just Trae Young and Onyeka Okongwu. Obviously, those are 2 major injuries, 2 of their top 8 players, including their best player. I'm also recording this podcast in the middle of the College Park game tonight. I want to note this, not really about tomorrow's game. I don't usually do game coverage of Skyhawks games on this podcast, but I'll be watching that game later on tonight for one particular reason, but really 2 particular reasons, I should say. One of course, is AJ Griffin's still there, but also Mo Gay is currently, as I'm speaking, making his G League debut for College Park. He has not played in a game of any kind until tonight since early November, since he suffered the back injury. So he's been out almost 4 months. That's a long time. And I would always keep expectations pretty low, but the Hawks like him for good reason. He's a very talented player, and good to have him on the court. If nothing else, I'm not saying he's going to play for the Hawks anytime soon, but him just being on a game situation court is a good thing on this Wednesday. Also, Trent Forrest made his G League season debut tonight. He's played there a lot in the past, just not this year. And of course, he's ineligible to play in Atlanta. Plus, Griffin's playing. Seth Lundy missed the game with a back injury, and there you have it. But anyway, for the game on Thursday, only Trey and Onyeka are out right now. I would guess that you won't see a ton of G League guys but the Skyhawks are on a homestand right now, so they could go back and forth. But in general, I would expect the same 11-man active group that we saw on Tuesday. And then if you throw another guy or two in there, no surprises whatsoever. On the Nets side, the only major injury is Cam Thomas, who is a super high usage kind of third guard type. Not my favorite archetype of a player, but Cam Thomas can really score. So him not being there takes away some upside for Brooklyn. He doesn't really do anything else besides score, but Cam Thomas can beat you kind of on his own if he's making his jump shots. So that's one option off the table. And Brooklyn's offense, again, not terribly inspiring. So all that said, our friends at FanDuel make the Hawks a 2-point underdog in the game on Thursday. That could change for Saturday, but this is just the Thursday game now. We'll see what happens in this one. That kind of tells you, just broadly speaking, about the market. The market is not impressed by Brooklyn because the Hawks only being a 2-point underdog on the road without Trey and Onyeka kind of tells you that Brooklyn is not seen as being very good. So we'll see. The Hawks are still underdogs. The Hawks were favored in the last 2 games that they won, albeit narrowly. And just to be candid, the difference between being a 2-point favorite and a 2-point underdog is not that big by any means. But it's a situation where I would say, at a minimum, you would hope/expect the Hawks to at least get one of these 2 games against Brooklyn. The Nets are not an impressive team. Could they lose both? Sure. It's in the NBA, a 2-game sample size doesn't really tell you that much about anything in a positive direction or a negative direction. But I would say probably the most, given the point spread and these 2 teams and the available talent, the most likely quote-unquote outcome is 1-1 in these 2 games. The Hawks could sweep them, no question. The Hawks could get swept, no question. But we'll see. And then after that, they go to Manhattan to play the Knicks on Tuesday. But anyway, between all those games, I'll have a podcast as I always do. And a good time to kind of plug that at the end of the show. Please subscribe to this podcast if you enjoyed what you heard here. I talked about the game last night. It's still very relevant at this point in time. We have guests on the show on a regular basis as well. You can find us on Apple and Spotify and YouTube, as well as all kinds of audio platforms. Please leave ratings and reviews. Spread the word to your Hawks fan friends and family. I would definitely appreciate that as well. Follow the show on Twitter /X at Locked On Hawks, or you can follow me there as well at BT Rowland. I also write about the Hawks regularly at patreon.com/BT Rowland. I appreciate everyone listening. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday into Thursday. I'll be back after the game on Thursday evening. Stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.